Humanity is splitting into two species, and you must choose a side. What you're about to hear is a narrative built from hypotheses, interpretations, and perspectives that have never had official confirmation. For the next 90 seconds, I am going to give you 3 simple questions. Your honest, unfiltered answers, the ones that rise before you have time to think, before your pride or your logic gets in the way, will reveal something about where you are standing right now. Not where you were last year, not where you hope to be. Right now in this exact season of your life, this is not a personality quiz. It is not entertainment. It is a diagnostic. Question 1. The next time you encounter a negative, fear-soaked headline, a political collapse, an economic disaster, a looming social catastrophe, observe your very first unguarded reaction. Is it a wave of hot emotion? A surge of fear, anger, outrage, a desperate need to find someone to blame and punish? Or is there beneath all the noise a strange, quiet detachment, a calm curiosity about what deeper truth is buried under the chaos, a sense, however faint, that the unraveling you see around you was somehow already written? Question 2. Find the quietest room in your house late at night when the world has gone to sleep. Turn off everything. Close your eyes and simply listen. What do you hear in the absolute silence? Do you hear nothing and a perfect flat void? Or do you perceive something else, a faint, persistent hum, a clean and steady tone that seems to be rising not from the walls around you, but from somewhere deep inside you? Not the sharp ringing of a medical condition, but something older and calmer than that, something that sounds almost like a signal. Question 3. When someone you genuinely love is in deep emotional pain, what happens inside you? Do you feel sympathy? A sad, distant pity from behind safe glass? A feeling for them, but not with them? Or do you feel something rawer and stranger? An actual fragment of their pain living inside your own chest, as if the boundary between you and them has grown thin, as if your heart has somehow learned to carry what theirs is too heavy to hold alone. If your honest answers lean toward the second option for each of those questions, then I want you to hear this clearly. You are not losing your mind. You are not imagining things. You are not broken. You are in fact experiencing the early tremors of something vast and ancient that the Bible described thousands of years before modern thinkers began to fumble for the language to name it. You are standing at a fork in the road of human history, and the path you choose. Not once, not dramatically, not in some single moment of cinematic decision, but in every quiet moment, every morning, every time you reach for your phone or close your eyes in prayer. That path is being decided right now. Something is happening to the human race. The evidence is everywhere if you know what you are looking at. Anxiety disorders have reached epidemic levels in cultures that have never been materially safer. Rage has become the common language of public life. People who were once kind have become cruel, and people who were once indifferent have suddenly been seized by a ferocious hunger for something real, something true, something that goes all the way down to the bone. Families are splitting, communities are fracturing, and beneath all of it, there is a question no political party and no pharmaceutical company has been able to answer. Why, at the height of human comfort, do so many people feel like they are dying inside? The answer that certain thinkers have proposed, and that this narrative explores as hypothesis and reflection, never as settled fact, is that humanity is not just changing culturally or politically. It is separating, not by race, not by wealth, not by geography, but by something far more interior, far more intimate than any of those external categories. It is separating according to an inward posture, a fundamental orientation of the human soul, and the consequences of that separation are playing out in the most personal theater imaginable, your own nervous system, your own home, your own heart. If what you are reading is already resonating with something you have felt for a long time, if you are someone who has sensed this fracture but never had words for it, consider sharing this with someone who needs to hear it. The conversation this starts may be exactly what they have been waiting for. And to understand this great separation, you have to first understand that what is happening to human beings right now is not new. The Bible has always described history not as a flat, repetitive line, but as a story with a direction, a story moving toward a conclusion, a story in which human beings are called to make a choice about which side of that conclusion they stand on. The prophet Isaiah wrote that God would do something new, that he would make a way in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The Apostle Paul, writing to the church in Rome, described all of creation groaning, as in the pains of childbirth, waiting for something to be born that had never existed before. The book of Revelation, for all its strange imagery, is fundamentally a narrative about a world in the process of being sorted, not by human judgment, but by divine discernment. Some interpreters of history, among them Edgar Cayce, the early 20th century figure sometimes called the sleeping prophet, proposed visions of a coming transformation in human consciousness, a new stage of human development that he sometimes described in almost evolutionary terms. It is important to say clearly that Cayce's framework was often drawn from sources that do not align with biblical Christianity. Concepts of reincarnation, karmic cycles, and cosmological energies that Scripture explicitly does not support. But beneath those particular frameworks, the intuition that something is being sorted, that humanity is being pressed toward a choice it cannot indefinitely avoid, is one that resonates deeply with the biblical narrative. The cosmology changes. The moral architecture does not. What the Bible describes is not a separation based on frequency or vibration. It is a separation based on something the Scriptures call the condition of the heart. In the Gospel of John, Jesus speaks of a kind of light coming into the world, and of the fact that some people move toward that light while others recoil from it, not because they are genetically inferior or spiritually defective, but because the light exposes what they have chosen to love. The great separation that is coming, and that in some senses is already underway, is not a punishment visited on the unprepared. It is the inevitable consequence of 1,000 daily choices made in the quiet dark of ordinary life. Now let us look honestly at those two paths, because they are real, and the contrast between them is visible in the texture of daily experience in ways that are impossible to dismiss. There is a growing portion of the human population that is experiencing what can only be described as a kind of collapse from the inside out, not a dramatic external collapse. Most of them are still going to work, still scrolling their phones, still maintaining the surface architecture of normal life, but something underneath has become unbearable. There is an anxiety that does not respond to medication the way it once did. There is a rage that has no clear object, but that does not diminish. There is a sense of constant emergency, a feeling that something is about to happen, that the world is about to fall, that safety is one news cycle away from being permanently revoked. This is not weakness. It is not stupidity. It is what happens to a human being who has been fed for years and decades an unrelenting diet of fear, and who has not yet discovered that the food is poisoned. The systems of information that surround modern human life have been architected, whether by deliberate design or by the cold logic of commercial incentive, to generate and sustain a particular emotional state: urgency, fear, outrage, and the desperate need for an enemy. Because these emotional states are addictive, because fear hijacks the oldest parts of the brain, because an audience that is afraid will keep watching, and an audience that keeps watching can be sold things. The result is that millions of people are walking through their lives in a state that their bodies and souls were never designed to sustain, a perpetual state of alert, of threat, of low-grade emergency. The physiological consequences are severe. Chronic stress floods the body with hormones that, in short bursts, are life-saving, but in constant flow are destructive, dismantling immune function, degrading cardiovascular health, rewiring the brain away from compassion and toward reactivity. The soul-level consequences are equally severe. A person who is chronically afraid cannot love well, cannot think clearly, cannot hear the still small voice that the prophet Elijah encountered when the wind and the earthquake and the fire had all passed and gone quiet. They are too loud inside for silence to reach them. And here is the tragedy at the heart of it. Many of these people are trying to solve the problem. They are trying desperately. They are looking for the right political solution, the right medication, the right relationship, the right career. They are trying to fix the flickering lights by changing the bulbs, without ever asking whether something has gone wrong at the level of the power source itself, without ever asking whether the hunger they feel is not a hunger for anything the material world can provide. The Bible has a word for this condition. Proverbs calls it a path that seems right to a man, but whose end is the way of death. It is not malice. It is misdirection. It is the tragedy of a soul that is looking for the living among the dead. Now turn and look at the other path, because it is real too, and it is not rare, and perhaps you have already begun to recognize it in yourself. There is another portion of the population, and it is growing, though it is not yet loud, that is having a fundamentally different experience of this same historical moment. For these people, the unraveling of the old world does not feel like catastrophe. It feels like clarification. It feels like something that was never quite true being finally, mercifully stripped away. They are not unaffected by the chaos. They feel it sometimes acutely, but they are not defined by it. There is something in them that refuses to be pulled all the way under. These are people who have, whether gradually or suddenly, whether through suffering or through grace or through some combination of the two that is impossible to fully separate, arrived at a place where the fear-based signals of the surrounding culture no longer have absolute authority over their interior life. They have begun to practice what the Apostle Paul, writing from a Roman prison, called a peace that passes understanding. Not the peace of circumstance, not the peace of having solved all the problems, but a peace that holds steady, even when the problems are still very much present and unresolved. How does this happen? How does a human being arrive at this kind of interior stability in the middle of a world that is, by almost any measure, accelerating toward disorder? The biblical answer is not complicated, though it is demanding. It begins with an honest reckoning with the nature of reality, specifically, with the reality that this life is not the whole story. The writer of Hebrews states it plainly. It is appointed for people to die once, and after that comes judgment. One life, one death, one accounting. Not the circular, endlessly recycling narrative of karma and reincarnation, which the Bible nowhere supports, but a linear story with a real beginning, a real end, and a real author who will have the final word on how it reads. This changes everything. When you understand that your life is not an accident and not a rehearsal, when you understand that the God who made the universe knew your name before you were born, as the psalmist writes, and has prepared a place for you, as Jesus promises in the 14th chapter of John, the tyranny of the present moment begins to loosen its grip. The news cycle stops being your master. The algorithm stops setting your emotional thermostat. You begin to see the chaos of the world not as evidence that God has lost control, but as the birth pangs of something new that has always been on the way. This is the first great mark of the person who is choosing the second path. They have stopped outsourcing their sense of reality to the fear machine. Not because they are naive, not because they have retreated into denial, but because they have found a source of orientation that runs deeper than the daily news, a source that does not fluctuate with the market, does not shift with the election, and does not depend on circumstances being comfortable in order to remain stable. They have, in the language of Jesus, built their house on rock rather than sand. And when the rain fell and the floods came, the house did not fall. The second great mark of these people is an expanding capacity for genuine compassion. This is one of the strangest and most beautiful consequences of choosing the path of interior transformation rather than exterior distraction. As the noise of the fear system loses its authority, something else becomes audible, the actual condition of the people around you. Not a performed empathy, not the weaponized compassion of political tribalism, but a real, quiet, costly willingness to be moved by what is moving, to grieve with those who grieve, to carry a portion of what others are carrying. The Apostle Paul called this bearing one another's burdens, and so fulfilling the law of Christ. This kind of empathy is not comfortable. It does not protect you from pain, but it is alive in a way that no amount of curated social media engagement can replicate. It is the sign of a nervous system that is no longer primarily in survival mode, a nervous system that has been given enough stability, enough grounding, enough peace from an external source to finally turn outward and notice the actual human beings that are standing in front of it. And if this is touching something real in your experience, if you recognize this fork in the road and feel the pull of the second path, stay with this. What follows is the most practical part of this conversation, and it may be the most important thing you hear today. So the question that naturally follows is, how? How does a person actually make this transition? How do you move from the first path to the second? How do you begin to disentangle your interior life from the fear machine that has been wired into every device you own and every institution you interact with? There are no magic words and no secret techniques, but there are practices, ancient practices, many of them explicitly biblical, that have been making this possible for human beings across cultures and centuries. And the reason they are not more widely practiced is not that they are difficult. It is that they are genuinely threatening to the systems that profit from your fear. The first practice is the most radical and the most immediately impactful. You must stop feeding the machine. This is not a metaphor. Your attention is finite. It is, in a very real and measurable sense, the currency with which you build your inner life. Whatever you consistently direct your attention toward shapes your emotional baseline, restructures your neural pathways, and determines the quality of your moment-to-moment experience. This is not mysticism. This is neuroscience, and it is completely consistent with what Paul wrote in his letter to the Philippians. Whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable. If there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. That is not a platitude. That is a protocol. It is a direct instruction about the management of attention as a spiritual and biological practice. And its counterpart is equally clear. Stop ingesting content that is designed to make you afraid, angry, and small. This does not mean being ignorant. It does not mean pretending the world has no problems. It means recognizing that the particular delivery mechanism of modern fear-based media is not informing you. It is farming you. Your anxiety is the crop. Your outrage is the harvest. And every minute you spend scrolling through it, you are volunteering to be harvested. For 30 days, just 30, consider withdrawing from that system. No mainstream news, no social media feeds curated to provoke, no comment section arguments with strangers who have no actual stake in your life and no capacity to change it. If something genuinely important happens in the world, you will hear about it. The truly significant events of human history have never required an algorithm to find their audience. But the daily drip of manufactured urgency that is being pumped into your brain through your phone, that requires your cooperation to continue, and you can withdraw that cooperation at any time. This is not political. It is not a statement about any particular ideology or media outlet. It is simply the recognition that you are the steward of your own attention, and that stewardship is a form of faithfulness. You were given one mind, one heart, one life. The way you spend your attention is the way you spend your life. Spend it accordingly. The second practice is about the body. This is often overlooked in discussions of spiritual formation, as if the physical dimension of human existence were somehow separate from or secondary to the interior life. But the biblical picture has always been holistic. The incarnation itself is the ultimate statement that bodies matter, that the physical world matters, that God deemed human flesh worthy not merely of creation, but of indwelling. And the practical consequence of this is that what you do with your body has direct and significant consequences for the state of your soul. Silence is the most undervalued practice available to a human being in the 21st century. Genuine, deliberate silence, not background noise with the volume turned down, but actual, intentional stillness, is where the nervous system begins to recalibrate. It is where the still, small voice that Elijah heard on the mountain becomes audible again. It is where, if you are willing to sit long enough, the anxiety begins to separate from you like sediment settling in a glass of cloudy water until what remains is clearer than it has been in years. 10 minutes a day, not to achieve anything, not to perform a spiritual discipline, simply to be still and to allow the noise to pass. Alongside silence, there is the practice of returning to the created world. Human beings did not evolve to exist in the inside of buildings, bathed in the light of screens. Whatever your theological convictions about origins, the basic observation holds. There is something in the natural world, in trees and soil and running water and open sky, that restores something in the human being. God in the beginning placed humanity in a garden, and while we cannot all live in gardens, we can choose regularly and deliberately to return to the green and growing world for at least some portion of our days. Not as a spiritual exercise in the cosmic energy sense, but simply as the act of a creature coming back into contact with its creation, with the handiwork of the God who made it and called it good. And there is water. Not as a mystical substance, not as a programmable crystal consciousness. The Bible does not teach these things, but as something the psalmist understood deeply when he wrote of the soul panting for God as the deer pants for water. Drink it slowly, drink it deliberately. Treat the most basic act of sustaining your physical life as the small sacrament it is, a daily reminder that you are a creature who depends on what you did not make, and that dependence is not weakness, but the beginning of wisdom. The third practice is perhaps the most joyful and also the most countercultural in a society that has been systematically isolated by the very technologies that promised to connect it. You must find the others. The Bible never presents the life of faith as a solo journey. From the earliest chapters of Genesis, through the covenant community of Israel, through the gathered church of the New Testament, the consistent picture is of human beings who need each other, not just emotionally, but spiritually, in a deep and essential way. Ecclesiastes says that two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. The early church in Acts did not merely believe the same things. They ate together, prayed together, sold possessions and distributed to those in need, and were together with glad and generous hearts. This kind of community, not the performance of togetherness on social media, not the shallow networking of professional life, but the actual, costly, face-to-face commitment to other human beings in their full complexity, is one of the most powerful forces for interior transformation that exists. It is also one of the rarest, because the fear machine actively works to prevent it. Division is its primary product. The sense that you are surrounded by enemies, that no one can be trusted, that every stranger is a threat, and every disagreement is a war. This is not an accidental byproduct of modern media culture. It is the mechanism by which human beings are kept small, reactive, and manageable. Isolated animals are easy to control. Connected communities are not. Finding the others means seeking out the people who are asking the same questions you are asking, who are willing to go deeper than the surface of things, who are not afraid of silence or honesty or the kind of conversation that takes longer than a social media post to complete. These people exist. They are in churches and in coffee shops and in neighborhoods and in workplaces. They are often quieter than the noise around them, but they are not rare. And when you find them, something shifts, not because they have answers you do not have, but because the act of honest, mutual, vulnerable human connection is itself a form of grace. The writer of Hebrews tells us not to neglect meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but to encourage one another, and all the more as we see the day approaching. The day approaching, even the ancient writers knew that history was accelerating towards something, that the choices being made in the present were not small private choices without consequence, but choices that were accumulating into a direction, a momentum, a destination. The separation that is happening now between those who are choosing the path of fear and those who are choosing the path of transformation is not new. It is the same choice that has always been in front of human beings. But the stakes of it, and the speed of it, and the clarity with which it is presenting itself have rarely been higher. This is not a message of fear. It is not a message that some people are better than others or more deserving of grace than others. The grace of God, as Paul writes in Ephesians, is not something that can be earned by choosing the right path or thinking the right thoughts or building the right community. It is given freely to those who receive it in faith. Salvation is not an evolutionary achievement. It is not the reward of a sufficiently upgraded nervous system. It is the gift of a God who, while we were still entirely going the wrong direction, sent his Son into the world not to condemn it, but to save it. But the fact that grace is free does not mean that choices are inconsequential. The New Testament is full of urgent practical instruction about how to live, about where to put your attention, how to treat your body, how to relate to other human beings, how to navigate fear, how to cultivate peace. These are not arbitrary rules. They are a description of the kind of life that is aligned with reality as it actually is, a life that moves with the grain of creation rather than against it, a life that is preparing you, every day, for the world that is coming, rather than anchoring you to the world that is passing away. 1 Corinthians 15, Paul's great meditation on resurrection, ends with a remarkable practical instruction given immediately after the most cosmic theological argument in the entire New Testament. He has just described the resurrection of the dead, the transformation of the mortal body into something imperishable and glorious, the final defeat of death itself. And then he says, "Therefore, my beloved brothers and sisters, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. Therefore, because of the resurrection, because of the world that is coming, because of the fact that this is not the whole story, be steady, be immovable, do your work. Do not be swept away by the storm of the present moment, because the present moment is not the last word. That is the invitation. That is, in the end, what the choice between the two paths comes down to, not a choice between one set of spiritual practices and another, not a choice between one tribe and another, not even a choice between fear and courage, though it includes that. It is a choice about what you believe is ultimately real. Is the fear real? The economic collapse, the political chaos, the social unraveling, is that the final truth of things? Or is there something more durable underneath it? Something that the chaos cannot reach? something that was true before the chaos began and will be true when it is over. The person who chooses the second path is not choosing to be naive. They are choosing to be, in the deepest sense, realistic. Realistic about the nature of a world that was made by a God who does not abandon what he makes, who has not forgotten a single creature that he formed, who numbers the hairs of our heads and sees every sparrow that falls, and who, when the fullness of time had come, did not send a message or a program or an algorithm, but sent his Son, in a body in the dirt, among the frightened and the broken and the ordinary, to say in the most embodied and undeniable way possible that the fear does not have the last word. That is the upgrade. Not a biological upgrade, not a DNA activation, not a frequency shift measured in hertz, but the ancient, demanding, profoundly liberating upgrade of a human soul that has stopped trying to find life in the things that cannot give it, and has turned instead toward the one who said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." The separation is real. The choice is yours. And it is being made, not in some distant future, not in a dramatic, cinematic moment of declaration, but right now, in the small and quiet decisions of an ordinary day, in what you reach for when you wake up, in what you allow to live rent-free in your mind, in who you spend your time with and what you talk about, and whether you leave those conversations more alive or more diminished than when you arrived. You were made for something more than fear. You were made, as the psalmist says, just a little lower than the heavenly beings crowned with glory and honor. The world around you may be doing everything in its considerable power to make you forget that. The noise may be very loud, and the fear may be very old, and the habits of attention may be deeply grooved, but they are not permanent. They are not who you are. They are patterns that can be interrupted, redirected, transformed. Choose the path of transformation. Find the silence. Find the others. Put your attention on what is true and beautiful and worthy of praise. Let the fear machine starve for lack of your participation, and let the part of you that has always known there is something more. Let that part breathe. Let it grow. Let it lead. The split is happening. The choice is yours. Welcome to the life you were made for. And if you feel, reading this, a particular kind of recognition, not the manufactured excitement of a motivational speech, but a quieter, more serious stirring, then pay attention to that. Do not dismiss it. Do not wait for a more convenient time or a less chaotic season of life to take it seriously. The seasons of life do not become less chaotic by waiting. The noise of the world does not diminish on its own. The window of choice is always now, which is both the most terrifying and the most liberating truth available to a human being. There is a moment in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus, looking out over the city of Jerusalem in what would be his final days, wept. Not because Jerusalem was beyond saving, not because the people there were uniquely wicked or uniquely hopeless, but because, as he said with a grief that has never been adequately captured in translation, they did not know the things that made for peace. They could see the political landscape with extraordinary clarity. They could calculate military odds and economic pressures and social dynamics with precision. But the thing that was actually in front of them, the thing that was making a way in the wilderness and streams in the desert, they could not perceive it. Not because it was hidden, because they were looking at everything else. That is the risk of this moment. Not that the way forward does not exist. It does. Not that the grace is insufficient. It is more than sufficient. The risk is inattention. The risk is that the noise will be loud enough, and the fear persistent enough, and the distractions numerous enough, that the thin and steady signal of something true will be drowned out before it is ever really heard. This is why the discipline of silence is not optional. This is why the curation of attention is not a luxury. This is why finding the others is not merely pleasant but necessary, because the path of transformation is not traveled alone, and it is not traveled passively, and it is not traveled without cost. But the cost of not traveling it, the cost of remaining anchored to a world that is passing away, of spending the irreplaceable days of your life feeding a machine that is feeding on you, that cost is far greater. Galatians 6 verse 7, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever a person sows, that will they also reap." This is not a threat. It is a description of how reality works. The seeds you plant in the quiet, unseen soil of your daily attention and your daily choices are already growing into something. The question is whether what they are growing into is something you recognize as the life you were made for, or something you will one day realize was never really yours at all. Sow to the Spirit. Sow to what is true. Sow to what is lasting. and reap in the fullness of time the life that does not end. The split is happening, the choice is yours, and it begins again, right now, in this moment, the same moment it has always been offered, the only moment that ever actually exists, now.